We can now solve more types of quadratic equations. The first types of quadratic equations we're going to go over are quadratic equations where I can use the square root method or the method of extracting the root. If we're asked to solve the equation x squared equals 4, what we can do is take the square root of both sides of the equation. When I take the square root of both sides of the equation, I need to remember to put a plus or minus in front of the square root of the constant. The square root of x squared, remember, is just going to be x, and the square root of 4 is 2. So the solution set to this particular equation is negative 2, 2. Notice in part B I have x squared equals negative 9. Before, we weren't able to solve this because we didn't have a way of dealing with square roots of negative numbers. Now we do, so we can solve it. Again, I square root both sides of the equation, and I get the square root of x squared equals plus or minus the square root of negative 9. The square root of x squared, you recall, is just x. To write the square root of negative 9, what I do is I use the rule we just introduced earlier and say that that's going to be the square root of 9 times I. The square root of 9, however, is 3, so I get x equals plus or minus 3i. So the solution set to this particular equation is 3i and negative 3i. Recall when we introduced the quadratic formula to you, we said that if the value of the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, was negative, that the equation had no real solution. Well, now that we have complex numbers, we can solve quadratic equations that have a negative discriminant. We have x squared minus 4x plus 8 equals 0. Remember, the quadratic formula says that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So, to use the quadratic formula, all we need to do is identify the values of a, b, and c. Remember that a is the coefficient on the squared term, b is the coefficient on x, and c is the constant. So in this particular problem, we have that a is equal to 1, we have that b is equal to negative 4, and we have that c is equal to 8. So all we need to do is substitute into the formula to solve the equation. We're going to get that x equals negative of a negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. We then divide this entire result by 2 times a, 2 times 1. Negative of a negative 4 is 4, plus or minus negative 4 squared is 16, minus 32, all over 2. That gives me 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 over 2. But the square root of negative 16, you recall, can be written as 4i. So now I have 4 plus or minus 4i all over 2. To simplify this, I take the denominator and divide it into the real and imaginary part. So I get 4 over 2 is 2, and then another 4 over 2 is 2. So I have in my solution set 2 minus 2i and 2 plus 2i.